everyone. I am Patricia Clark, and I'm here on Tommy's podcast to really just have and hear a story that I'm first of all honored that you asked me to be the one interviewing you for the story, because what we're going to talk about today, I have come to find out Tommy's never shared before publicly. So
that's true.
Yeah, so I'm really glad. So one of the things that you read about when you read the New Testament is that Jesus is always having these first-time interactions with people, and he'll say to them, go and tell what I've done for you. And it's this idea that just the stories that we have, the individual stories that we have of God showing up in our lives for the first time has this incredible impact on other people. And today we're going to hear the story of you in your childhood when you first woke up to the idea that there was a God who sees you and wants to know you, and really the story of how you came to a place of faith, which you've never told before.
Yeah, this is a really personal story. I can't remember exactly what prompted it, but I realized, I've been doing this podcasting, we have been, for many years. And as part of, so many of the guests that we've had on, they tell their stories and their stories of faith. And it's this wide variety of stories. And I realized that I have never told my story of coming to faith. And part of that, because it's a very, very personal story, as you will hear, that's led me often when I talk about my faith and my story of faith to jump a little bit ahead to another story that is not quite as sensitive and as personal. I also realized that, doing this podcasting and talking about growth and talking about faith, probably many people assume I grew up in a Christian family and was one of those that always kind of from a small child was acquainted with Christian things. And that's not the case at all. No one.
I always assumed that.
Yeah. No one in my family. We were not a Christian family really in any sense of the word. We were twice a year Episcopalians. I mean, solidly not more than twice a year. We would go to church the first Sunday of the school year. Parents would decide, okay, well, Episcopalian church, we'll go and kind of re-engage the kids. And it was almost like the New Year's resolution. We would start going to church again, but it would only last one Sunday. And we'd go to church somewhere right around Christmas. Never again in the year. Not Easter. We had, none of us would have expressed having really kind of any kind of faith. We were just, Christian by name. We didn't know anybody who was Christians. So the way God entered into our family was a big, massive surprise. And honestly, it kind of began with the story that I'm going to tell. And what's also a little bit unusual is, for a reason that I can't explain, even though we didn't really kind of have any Christian background, I always believed in God. As a little child, I just absolutely had no doubts about God's reality and that he was real and that even he was personal. I just had no idea what that meant. And so it had zero impact on my life other than I just knew that was true. So anyway, just a little background. I think probably most people assumed I was, in a Christian family from the beginnings, and that, that's not the case. So I thought it was just time perhaps to tell this story, even as personal and as sensitive as it is.
Well, I appreciate the way you set that up, because I think that's true for so many people. It's one thing, you don't have to go far to believe that there is some sort of God in the universe out there that creates nature that's so beautiful, that has brought so much order to like the ecosystems down to the molecular level. Like, it's harder to not believe in God, I think, than to believe in God for many of us. Not everybody.
In a real general sense.
In a general sense. But you know, the word that comes to mind as you're describing it is the word that we use for Jesus at Christmas, which is incarnate, which is to take on flesh and like walk amongst us.
Yes.
And I think today we don't have Jesus walking amongst us, but we have story after story after story of people having this out there view of God. And then all of a sudden something will happen in their life where they have this revelation or this miraculous opening of their eyes where they see that God is in their life and actually notices and sees them as a human being individually. And that is like a seismic incarnation in your life that completely alters everything.
It was totally seismic for me, as you'll hear. And you've never heard this.
I haven't. And I showed up here today.
This story. So it was a huge occurrence. It was a life-changing event for me in ways beyond what I even realized at the time. And I think it just illustrates the, incredibly individual and personal ways that God engages with people, that he chose to engage with me. So that's why I wanted to do this and tell this story and really, in a sense, just pray in certain aspects of it that it'll be heard with the right ears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's jump in.
Yeah.
What age are we talking about in this part of your life?
So background, I'm the youngest of four.
Okay.
In my family. And in school, I was one of the youngest in my class, which also meant I was one of the smallest in my class. Add on to that, I was pretty shy by nature, which meant that I was the perfect person to be constantly teased, both at home and at school. I was, that just kind of shy kid that had no idea how to handle teasing and had no idea how to combat the strong alpha personalities that you get. And so that plays into it. I was kind of quiet, behind the scenes type of person. And so the story really begins in 8th grade.
Okay.
So I guess I was probably 14 years old, somewhere, around that time. And it was at school, St. Christopher's, where I went to school, Episcopalian school. And it happened in a religion class, although that has nothing to do whatsoever with the story, other than the teacher, who was the chaplain, was notoriously late for every single class. So he would come in basically 10 minutes after the bell rang, which meant you gave this group of 8th grade boys 10 minutes of unrestrained time to do and wreak whatever havoc they could wreak.
As a sidebar, you're notoriously 10 minutes early everywhere. And I'm going to always wonder if this hard thing that happened in class.
Yeah, maybe so.
Maybe you didn't just find God, you found timeliness.
That's right, subconsciously. Yeah. So we had this class. It was the spring semester of class. And this teacher was always late. And we were in a class and we had a couple of really alpha guys. And they decided, well, they had nothing better to do than to find someone and make their life miserable. So I was the lucky recipient of this. So the classroom had a big blackboard up in front of the classroom, and on the side, it also had a second blackboard. So one day before class, I saw them write up on the board, TT plus LW. Okay, code language, everybody knows this for all eternity. That means, such and such like such and such. And I'm going, what in the world is this about? I don't know anybody with the initials LW. I figured it was someone from our, sister school, St. Catherine's. So finally asked one of the guys, who is this? And this is where, honestly, the story kind of gets sensitive for me, because they told me that LW was a guy in the grade below. Mm. I didn't really even know the guy. Mm. This was the early 70s. Mm-hmm. For me, as a quiet, small, kind of behind the scene guys, to have a group of people spreading a rumor that I was gay, and I was not, was one of the worst things that anybody could do to me. I mean, they could have beat me up to a pulp and it would have been 10 times easier than this. So the minute I heard what they were doing, I was terrified that this was going to get out, that they were going to spread this publicly, and they were going to make my life miserable for the remainder of my years, at St. Christopher's. It was the worst thing I could possibly imagine. And I was terrified. So I would run up to the front of the room and start erasing this. Well, that really made it fun, because they positioned guys in the front and on the side, and they would write it up, and I would literally run back and forth erasing it. And I would have people say, who is LW? And I would just lie. Oh, it's some girl over at St. Catherine's. Just devastated that this was going on. And this went on, as I recall, and I recall this pretty specifically, for probably a solid month. Every single day, desperately running up to the front of the room and to the side of the room, erasing, trying to keep these three guys from spreading this out. So it was a horrible thing.
You don't get through adolescence unscathed, but I don't think I've heard a story like that in a long time. And, I'm a little bit younger than you, but even not that much. I mean, going to an all-boys school in the 70s, I think it's hard for kids to feel like they're abnormal sexually today, but it was infinitely, or just, not atypical, but infinitely harder back then, and at an all-boys school. And to be clear, the hard part is that you didn't feel that you were, but you were being accused that you were, and you were powerless to stop it.
Right.
So the story isn't about going through adolescence being gay, which would also be a hard story in the 70s and even today. So That's not what your story is about. Just want to name that. But what was that like for you that month? Was it all consuming? Like when you went to bed at night, you knew you would have to face that the next day, and
It was totally all consuming. I was so utterly terrified and humiliating. I didn't tell my parents. No one knew what was going on. And I knew every single day I had to walk into that classroom where the teacher was going to be late and try to keep this under cover for another day. And I had no power whatsoever to change this. So every single day I was basically in terror of what I was going to encounter, thinking that it was functionally inevitable that at some point they were going to take it to the next level and there would be nothing I could do about it. So it was horrible.
In 8th grade, to have someone say that about you, there would be nothing you could do about it, and that would follow you through school, totally alter your social trajectory.
Yeah.
And I can also I get why you wouldn't even want to tell your parents or tell someone else, because that raises suspicion. So it's almost like
they might want to enter in.
Yeah.
It just escalates.
It just
everything.
escalates. I mean, and it breaks your heart, because that isolation and powerlessness that you felt, that you just had to carry every day, and just the image of you running back and forth.
Well, and I certainly understand these days the kind of bullying that some people enter into, because this was a psychological, emotional bullying for me, and it was terrible, and I didn't want it to get out and all of this. So anyway, in some senses, that's not the center of the story, but that's the context, that I was going through a massive crisis that I had no control over, that felt like it was about to explode. And so one night, every night, I thought about this. One night, I said a prayer. It didn't feel unusual for me to pray that I remember, but I said a prayer. And this was a deeply heartfelt prayer that I have no idea, kind of, in a sense, where it came from. So the prayer I said is, God, if you take this rumor away, I will follow you for the rest of my life. And it was absolutely such a deeply heartfelt prayer. And I went to school the next day, and it was worse than ever. The guys took it to another level, fractionally short of telling everybody what the thing was about, to where, as an 8th grade boy, I was holding back the tears, as best as I could, running through the classroom, trying to keep this thing, and it was worse than ever. And then the next day came about, and it continued, just at this new escalated stage. And I'm thinking, it is just all going to explode, and my days are over there. That's the way it felt to me.
And were you praying the same prayer at night, or were you sort of angry?
No, I wasn't
Because it got
angry.
worse?
I said that prayer. The next day happened. I don't remember praying anything that next night other than thinking that's kind of crazy. How in the world would God stop this thing from happening? It's kind of like that was a stupid prayer. You're just going to have to deal with this. And so, the next night I thought, nothing about it. Second day happened. It was terrible. And I came home that night and I prayed, and I remember this, and I remember the prayer almost to the exact words that I said. And I still to this day have no idea how I knew to pray like this. I said, God, I know this is not the way to pray. Lord, regardless of what you do with this, I want to follow you for the rest of my life. And I said that prayer with the full expectation that absolutely nothing would happen in terms of the next day, other than it was inevitable this thing was going to come out. Terrified. And I came to school the next day, and I walked into the classroom, and for the first time in over a month or more, they didn't do anything. They just sat down. Nothing showed up. I was so absolutely in awe, not knowing what was going on, that I did probably one of the stupidest things I've ever done in my life. I went to the ringleader and I said, look, I don't know what's going on, but why did you stop doing this? It was so miraculous in my mind. I went, why? How would you do this every single day and then just stop? And he just looked at me and went, oh no, we just didn't feel like it. They never, ever, for the rest of the year, for the rest of my entire time, did that ever show up again. And I came home, and it was one of those moments, almost like you read about in the Old Testament, of this fear and trembling, because I knew from that moment that that could not happen unless God answered that prayer, that was a miracle of a magnitude that I had never heard about in my life, that God entered in such a personal way to hear that first prayer, do nothing, and then draw me in to pray, to say, I want to follow you for the rest of my life. And then just enter in with such love and compassion to completely answer, to do beyond what I could ever imagine. I had no idea what it meant to follow God. I had no examples. I didn't know of anybody who was a Christian. I didn't know of anybody who said that they followed God. But that prayer was one of the deepest, that second prayer was one of the deepest, most honest, most all-in prayers I probably have ever prayed in my life. And it wasn't until about a year later that I became acquainted with a small group of Christian guys and found out, I guess, what that prayer meant. So it was just amazing what happened that, I mean, I don't even know how to put words to it, that God brought me to that place and entered in to my 8th grade quiet life in such a powerful, powerful way. And that was a little over 50 years ago. And even though I've had times where I kind of vacillated, I've followed him the rest of my life. And I think it began in some ways maybe prepared before that, but it began with that prayer that night, that regardless of what happens, regardless of what you do, I will follow you for the rest of my life.
Sorry, as you know, I have a middle school boy. So I'm just thinking about you. And I know St. Christopher's so well, all boys schools, and just like this little youngest, smallest boy, and how much that has changed your life, but also because I've lived in Richmond and know your whole family, I know your siblings, I know your nieces and nephews, I know your kids, although I didn't ever meet Perrin, but
I wish you had.
I know.
Oh, I wish you had.
And I've grown up here, and I know how you and your brother Mike, during these long years at a local church at it used to be called Third Presbyterian Church, you taught this Bible study with him, or a Sunday school class, really. And tons and tons of people attended for years and years. And even now you teach in multiple places. A lot of men who, wouldn't necessarily be interested in that sort of thing, but are, and somehow you communicate in a way that really connects with them. And, I don't know, I'm just kind of blown away thinking, for me personally, I'll just speak to me personally, you and Wheezy have overcome so many hard things and continued not just to have faith, but also just to be a picture of people who continue to live and contribute and have joy and have a good life on the other side of unbearable suffering. And for those of us who have also gone through things, maybe not to the extent as yours, what you don't realize is that just the example of your life is a picture of hope for others who go through hard things. And I know that you are who you are, and you and Wheezy continue on because of the promises and the hope that you have in God. And just to know that that started with such a powerful and personal, almost like a pursuit of you at such a important young age, when you were just becoming a man, kind of takes my breath away.
Well, it's this thing that I will never, ever forget, in that, in some senses, I have no choice but to follow God, now. Even through some of the really difficult places we've been, and, people might ask, were you mad? Did you want to walk away from God? How could I? He was real. I think back to that day that I can visualize the classroom. I can visualize where I said those prayers. I remember the exact words. It's like I could never, ever deny the reality and the personal nature of God. And that he brought me to that place of saying, I am all in. And one of the reasons I wanted to tell this, that this came to my mind, is because I think often, even in the Christian church, we have so cheapened what faith is. And we've kind of just said, oh, say this prayer. If you say this prayer, that's what it is. And God works in lots of different ways. And God works through those simple prayers in all these different ways. But the power of saying to God, I am all in. Wherever you take me, whatever you want of me, whatever happens, I am all in. That prayer, that commitment is what changes a life in such a huge way. I so want that, particularly people who vacillate. They're kind of just on the line and just go, oh, if you would just give it all, if you would just give it all to God, you can't imagine how he will show up in your life. You can't imagine what would happen if you would just go all in for God. And I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't even know what all in meant, but it was all in. And I want that so badly. It's why I do, it's what this podcast is about. It's I want that because that's life. And we're so prone to find, these artificial versions of what life is about. And life is an adventure of walking with a God who loves us so intimately and uniquely and personally that he would step in to a quiet 8th grader's life and enter in and do a miracle.
It reminds me of this idea in a scripture where it talks about he calls you by name. And I can't think of a more personal way for you to have felt called by, we talk about the God out there, this awareness of that, but just that transition from the out there to your name. It was like more than him saying, hey, Tommy, I see you. It was more like, I see into this place of your most vulnerable spot, your most greatest fear, and care that you don't have to bear this alone. And it also reminds me a little bit of those verses that talk about when you pass through the waters, you won't be overcome. When you walk through the fire, you won't be burned. And I know that you have walked through fire in your life and you have passed through like tumultuous storms and waters, but that you have come out intact, I think is a testament to like, we can almost endure anything if we have the presence or awareness that God is with us and sees us personally. At least that's the story that we're told in scripture. And that's in some ways the story that you're telling now and that your life tells, really.
Well, and again, part of why I want to do this is because these things that we say that God's with us, these platitudes that we say, these truths that sound good, but people wonder, is it true? Is it really true? Is it real? That story began, but has shown itself time and time again to say, no, these aren't just words. It is true. God is real. God does care about me. Not for what I can do. He just loves me and he cares about me and he does you and he does everybody who's listening to this. And it's not just a lot of words out there.
Well, that's an amazing story. And the other thing that comes to mind is that, like, the awe that you must have felt. I mean, I think of the trauma you felt when you saw that TT plus LW, like just the gut. I can feel that when you tell that story, like the trauma of that realization of what they were doing and how that would wreck your life and how guttural that was. But then also the awe when you realized that not just the boys had stopped, but that like God had stopped them. The awe of that reaches even deeper than the trauma.
It did. I can remember going home after that day, and I had no words. I had no words to pray.
That.
It was beyond saying, "Oh, thank you, Lord." That was just. It was just like, what just happened?
It's like they talk about in Revelation, every knee shall bow. Like, it's not even a choice. You're just sort of brought to your knees in awe.
Yeah.
And I can even see, not that you didn't have a choice, but it was just the natural reaction when that awareness became real to you to live your life the way you have. It's just, it's almost like the normal reaction to that awareness.
Yeah. It was.
When your eyes are open to that.
It was awesome. And I just, I pray, I hope this for many, many people. It took my saying yes to God without condition. You know, that was the place God brought me to say yes to God without condition. And when I thought about doing this, so I just add one last little thought that comes in. It reminded me of wedding vows. It reminded me that the wedding vows that we say to our spouse is one of the most clear expressions of what a relationship with God is like. That I take you, Lord God Almighty, for better or for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as I shall live. And I realize that when someone says that vow, they don't say, if you do it too. It is a vow. It is 100% all in commitment, regardless of what the other person does. And I realized that is exactly what faith is all about. And that was the place God brought me. An unconditional, I am all in, regardless of what happens. And then God just showed up with mighty power in that.
I mean, when I hear your story, when I hear you tell it, it almost feels like that prayer came from God, though. Like,
no
not
question.
even from within you, like, because that he planted that prayer in you to even ask that.
There is no question in my mind. I look back on that and I go, how could an 8th grade boy that had virtually no, religious conversations, didn't know anybody, how could I have known to pray that? It absolutely came from him.
Yeah, but also for him to give you that gift of you praying it, not him telling you to pray it, because you're the way I know you is such a guy of goals, that you can look back and know that you and your 14-year-old boy's self made this covenant commitment to God is really cool. You know, when I got married, Kevin Green, who's a local minister, did our charge. And he said, you were making these vows to each other, but really the only reason a human can commit like this, commit their whole lives, no matter what, to another person, is because you are entrusting that God is in that person and will help them commit to you. And so it's this whole idea of that kind of turning of your life, that kind of commitment. None of us are really capable of that, or even capable of coming up with the desire or the prayer to do that. But God gives us that desire to turn ourselves over to him. And ironically, in doing that, there is so much freedom. But at the moment, it feels like you're giving up the freedom. But that commitment, that covenantal turning over, I just look at your life and your family's life and see how much it has protected and carried you guys through so much.
Yeah, God gave me the prayer, but yet it was my prayer.
Yeah,
you know,
isn't that funny?
And both are absolutely true.
Yeah.
So,
well, thanks for sharing that story. Really, I'm going to take that with me. I'm glad I got to hear it.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for listening to my story, and I pray somehow that it will resonate with you and encourage you to go all in for God in your life. So thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back next week.